Bit of a grandiose title, I realise, for my talk, so we're going to ignore that. Just like to start by thanking Catherine and Lionel in particular for asking me along to talk to you today. It's been a fantastically interesting discussion since I arrived at lunchtime. I'm going to start with a few words about NICE and a few words about innovation. But sort of running through what I want to talk to you about is thinking about what are the areas of newness that are important when we're thinking about the value of medical technologies. And apologies if anything that I cover has already been covered today, because I didn't write till lunchtime. So, you know, if I'm a bit repetitious of stuff you've heard this morning, then I apologise in advance. The other kind of question that I'm going to be talking about a bit at the end is what do we do when we don't know everything about a technology? So these are just the kind of threaded thoughts that are running through. For the benefit of people who don't know, NICE is the National Institute for Health and Clinical Excellence, and we're responsible for providing guidance and quality standards. And also we manage a national database to improve people's health and prevent and treat ill health. Just to put a bit more flesh on that, we produce guidance in various areas, including public health, which looks at sort of health promotion, prevention of ill health, looks at things like local authority and voluntary sector, and wider public health types of issues like smoking cessation and returning to work after sickness, those kind of big questions. We provide clinical guidance on health technologies, so that's medicines, treatments, devices, diagnostics, procedures, and we provide clinical practice guidance on whole areas of health. So those are our sort of clinical guidelines where we will look at a whole pathway of treatments and all the sort of care that goes along with that for specific diseases. We've got a few other things up our sleeve. The database that I mentioned earlier is NHS evidence. I get into trouble for calling it a Google-style device, but I do call it a Google-style device because, frankly, that's what it is. Allows the NHS to search the internet for up-to-date evidence of effectiveness, and that can be, you know, searching evidence which the NHS employees have access to via the electronic library for health. It can be guidance from NICE, colleges and other accredited bodies, and it's all sort of rated and of an approved standard. We also produce quality standards, which is a sort of reduction of all our guidance into the most important things that you would need to do in order to deliver a good quality service, and that's a fairly new offering from NICE. We're going to be seeing an awful lot more of that over the next few years. We also run the Quality and Outcomes Framework, which enables GPs to be paid, so that's obviously extraordinarily important. A few other things besides, but those are the main things that NICE does. Now, just sort of thinking about innovation, a couple of years ago, Professor Sir Ian Kennedy did a report for NICE called Appraising the Value of Innovation and Other Benefits. And I'm going to be talking a little bit more about that in a moment. But one of the things that he said about innovation in his typical sort of dry and lawyerly kind of style was, there is no shortage of definitions of innovation. Their very number suggests an amorphous concept. And then he goes on to be exceedingly rude about some people's sort of definition of innovation. So I'm not even going to try and define innovation. We sort of started off, you know, a couple of years ago using the word a bit in relation to our evaluation of medical technologies, and frankly we gave up because it is an amorphous concept. Did anyone try and define it with any success this morning? No, it's no point, is there? However, people have been expecting us to have some awareness of it for some considerable time. So when we were first set up in 1999, we were given directions from the Secretary of State, and those were revamped in 2005. And as you can see, Section 2 bracket 4 subsection D, because this is, a piece of legislation, talks about NICE exercising its functions, having regard to various factors, including the broad balance of clinical benefits and costs, the degree of clinical need of the patient, and any guidance from the Secretary of State, but also, crucially, the potential for long-term benefits to the NHS of innovation. And that sort of idea has never really gone away, and companies, particularly pharmaceutical companies, have a kind of special plea that they will make in terms of the value of innovation. And what I'm going to be talking about now is really teasing out, just how valuable it is it, because our job as NICE is to find out the value of technologies and treatments to the NHS and present those in terms of guidance. So we are particularly interested in that, but it's a slippery concept, really. The other place where it came up quite a lot was in the Next Stage review, the Darcy report from June 2008, where he talked about the need to support innovation to foster a pioneering NHS. I actually, talking to somebody else from Imperial who works in management innovation, there's all sorts of business research being done on the fact that, innovative companies are more profitable than non-innovative companies. There doesn't seem to be anything that tells us whether health services that innovate are actually produce better outcomes. Nobody seems to have done that research. Now, we're all just accepting it, aren't we? And it's a bit like the question earlier about, what are the health systems that are innovating? We could go back even sort of higher up the chain and just say, well, do we even know that it actually leads to better outcomes, or is an awful lot of effort expended on innovation that doesn't really go anywhere? Does anybody know whether that research has been done? I don't think it has, but it's been massively done in business. Darcy also said that we wanted to simplify the pathway by which medical technologies move from development into wider use. And as a result of that, NICE was asked to set up the Medical Technologies Evaluation Programme and Advisory Committee, which our lovely Suzanne Ludgate is a member of. And that I'll go on to talk about that a bit more in a minute. Coming back to the Kennedy report, the remit was really about the approach that should be taken by NICE to ensure that innovation is properly taken into account, and should particular forms of value be considered more important than others, and how should we define innovation, and what is the relationship between innovation and value. I think he only answered these questions in the most sort of tangential way. I actually looked at the report again, and he never actually answered those questions, He raised lots of very interesting things, but I'm not very sure that he answered the questions. We let him off because he's such a nice man. He really is ever so sweet, and he's ever so interesting. And it was a very good exercise, because he ran it as a sort of series of workshops that involved industry and academics and regulators and patient groups, where really giving people the opportunity to sort of thrash out the issues. Much of the sort of issues that came up in the Q&A session were the types of things that he was addressing. So the kind of pharmaceutical view of the world in terms of innovation, really, and he kind of accepted this. Kennedy really sort of bought this idea that, pharma could simply say, okay, the product's new, it's a new product, it is an improvement on existing products, and it offers a step change in outcome for the patients. And anything that does that, if it's sort of innovative in that way, then it deserves to have a higher price now paid for it in order to achieve those. Now, I sort of put my utilitarian head on for a minute, and I think we all did at NICE, actually, and we thought, hang on a minute, a NICE evaluation, when we're calculating an incremental cost-effectiveness ratio, we look at all the evidence, we look at the beneficial outcomes, we look at whether or not it is an improvement on the existing products. The fact that it is new actually is neither here nor there, because all we're interested in is is it an improvement, and does the evidence actually demonstrate that? But he was a bit more, he took a sort of bit of a broader view of that and was saying, well, okay, but he really bought the notion that there will be economic benefits to many innovative products which might have a wider societal impact. It might actually be the product, you know, as broad as the product actually provides income, employment, and hence income across wider society. It might increase the GDP. It might sort of make the UK a better place for other companies to do business, which might bring other benefits to society. So he took quite a broad view, whereas in NICE, the view that we're taking is the sort of personal health and the costs that are and benefits that derive to the NHS from providing that health. We're not looking at things like, you know, the reduction of the burden of full employment or those kind of factors. So that, I think that's where the tension really came in and why we didn't altogether totally agree with what he was saying. In medtech, about this time when he was doing this work was about the time that we were setting up the new program. And that obviously the purpose of the new program was to determine value. And we very much recognised the low evidence base that is typical of medical devices and technologies and developed our methods accordingly. And that was kind of what he was recommending that we should do. And we were kind of thinking of doing that anyway, so that was all okay. But he was quite, he was sort of prepared to accept that there should be a recognition of the lower level evidence base, and that might be the more so in medical technologies, because we might be trying to introduce those at an even earlier stage than we would pharmaceutical products, which typically go through that very lengthy development phase before they even hit the NHS. So that's the kind of difference between the two. And, well, at the end of all that, we all felt like a glass of wine. And the reason that is not my lounge, by the way, I really must just emphasise this, that's particularly scruffy, and I don't smoke, and my husband doesn't wear boots like that. But the purpose of putting up the whole glass of wine thing is that Ian Kennedy is very Australian and extremely charming. And of course, he sort of, as Australians often do, they have very kind of, you know, very concrete sort of pictures and metaphors that they like to use. So so Ian Kennedy would say, you know, if somebody gives me a glass of water and says, this glass of water will turn into wine, I'll say, come back when it's a glass of wine and give it to me then. So in other words, he was, although he seemed to be sort of giving a broader view to the way that NICE should value innovation, by the same token, he was expecting a higher level of proof about that innovation. Now, what we're trying to do with medical technologies at NICE is, instead of saying, give me the glass of wine, we are probably a bit more prepared to accept that the water is going to turn into wine. And I sort of think that we probably, with medical devices and diagnostics, we're really taking them when they're kind of grape juice, if you'll take the analogy a bit further. So they haven't got to quite to wine yet. But the whole job of Suzanne and the Medical Technologies Advisory Committee is really to determine whether that promise is likely to be delivered. And in order to do that, we kind of go through a process in order to do that. And we do take as much as we conceivably can from companies who are engaging with us, who have a product on which we're going to develop medical technologies guidance, which is one of the new types of guidance at NICE. So we'll look at, you know, a sponsor submission, and there needs to be some clinical evidence in there, because by definition, if, you know, you can have absolutely no feeling that the promise is going to be delivered if there's absolutely nothing, however stunning the idea is. If you've got a stunning idea and all the experts are saying, my God, this is a stunning idea, and you've got a lower level of evidence, well, the committee might be a bit more prepared to sort of examine it, particularly if it's got a potentially big impact. But even so, we use a submission. There needs to be some cost modelling, and that submission is independently examined and analysed by the External Assessment Centre on our behalf. And we use a lot of expert advice. It's really important at that early stage to get a sort of view as to whether whether the technology is going to be useful, how they stack up, whether what's the difference between what you've got now and what this new product is really going to do, and is it a difference that's really worth examining and really worth having? And that benefit is absolutely crucial, and where products often fall down in this process is that the companies don't have a coherent story about how that product is really going to make a difference to clinical practice in a tangible kind of way, and that's such a core part of the value of the product. We also look at information from patient and care organisations. Incredibly difficult to engage at this sort of early stage, we find, and often aren't that aware of innovation. So we'll go and ask the relevant patient group, if NICE, do you think this is a topic that NICE should be evaluating? Is it important? Would it benefit your patients or your members? Is it of interest? We don't always get a reply to those kinds of questions. We can't always find people who know enough about what's going on. We also look at information at that early stage about ongoing trials and registers. And when we're looking at evidence, we're looking... There's been various conversations around and about the place about, how easy it is to get this sort of evidence, how much it costs, what the barriers are to companies doing it, whether they should be expected to or not. When we're producing medical technologies guidance, we'll look at a very, very rich mix of the available data, and that can be published or unpublished. It's lovely if it's randomised, but we know it isn't always. It can be primary evidence, it can be secondary evidence, so in other words, reviews or modelling. It can be observational data such as that derived from registers or even audits. And we're trying to get the companies to really share with us the absolute maximum of what they've got available. And sometimes they don't even understand what they've got. That's quite common for companies to be sitting on, data that they don't realise the importance of it. So our interactions are very much geared around that. And the purpose of all of this really is to see what that benefit is all about. Very quickly, I will show you the sort of thoughts when the committee is carrying out cost consequences. It's developing its guidance, which is based on cost consequences analysis. And the cost model looks at, it's literally a sort of, in its crudest form, a back of the envelope, which will look at the costs in terms of acquisition and running costs, anything that might be needed in terms of concomitant treatments or disposable costs or rental costs, staffing costs that are associated with it, training if there needs to be training. There might be things like, you need to rebuild a bit of your department in order to get the kit in. So all of those are examples of inputs on the cost side. On the savings side, what we're looking for is a resource releasing proposition. So basically, the aim of medical technologies guidance, which I just realised I neglected to tell you, is to find products that are at least clinically non-inferior, but which release resources. And the importance of that is, for thinking back to the Jim Easton presentation, this is where the NHS is at, and I had one of the biggest senior member of one of the biggest device companies in the world said to me one day, there rather knowingly and rather sagely, as though I was a bit of a twit, said, there's no such thing as a resource releasing medical technology, just one that is mispriced. Which was quite an interesting take, and in a health service where we're looking for such big such big savings. That really isn't the answer. You know, we really need people to come up with those innovations. It's easy to see how that's going to happen, isn't it? Because you've got medical devices are so uniquely placed to replace a sort of one-off experience, to bring a one-off experience in and replace lots and lots of cost further down the line. And that is one of the parts of the model. So we will look at the reduced costs of improved health outcomes or healthcare events avoided further down the line. So if the proposition is insert this device, you will reduce the drug regime very drastically and at some point it will stop, then that will be put into the model. Or if the proposition is, you know, use this device and you will reduce future hospitalisation events, as long as the time horizon over which that happens is plausible, then again, that will be an acceptable part of the model. And then in the modelling, in the blue box there, that's a slightly more difficult one because you often can't actually put a value, a financial value on this. But it might be a particularly important part of the innovation that this is something like, you know, simply easier to use for clinical staff. You just put it in the theatre once and you don't have to keep changing it every time you change the patient, for example, or it's much more acceptable for patients to use it. It's less embarrassing or it's more pleasant for patients to use. And those kind of factors are quite difficult in this sort of fairly rapid approach that we use where we're not calculating quality, so we're not going off and getting a big survey done of whether people actually like this or not. We're simply saying, okay, well, is it plausible that it's easier to use? I think what the committee will do there is that then sort of forms part of the considerations, the way the committee will view the model if there are also other beneficial factors. But at the moment, we're not sort of clever enough to value those, and maybe we don't need to. But you're sort of seeing what goes through our thought process or through the committee's thought process when it's thinking about value innovation. So really there's nothing there about is it new. However, you know, the purpose of our activity is really to sort of draw medical technologies through to the NHS to have them used as soon as we possibly can. But we've kind of, you know, we haven't really done the sort of Kennedy thing of putting a special value there on innovation. But what does go on there is or what is required for a positive recommendation from that is a very, you know, that model must be able to be populated in a way that is coherent and supported by the clinical evidence. So that's the way that we approach it. And what do we do if there's not enough evidence to make a recommendation? So here is a novel approach by NICE. When we set up this stream of activity, we knew that because of the early stage at which we're looking at promising devices, there would very often be a need to generate further evidence. And therefore, there is a small amount of resource to do that. And we've contracted that service from our external assessment centres. And what it looks like is this is known in the office as the modified U-bend, because there is actually a much, much more complicated version of the U-bend. But this is the kind of modified version. And basically, the kind of principle is that once the committee has had a look and produced some guidance, it will then and if the recommendation is for further research, it will then pass that on to the external assessment centre to translate it into a protocol and really to facilitate research, work with the company, explore funding sources across the board, find some clinical partners, establish the research infrastructure, get the iris sorted out, and then it passes over to the clinical partners to recruit the patients and generate the data. It then passes back to the external assessment centre to analyse the data, produce the report, which then becomes evidence for NICE to review the guidance. So this is this bit in the middle is the bit that we are contracting is nice. We don't have any money for the primary research because that's not our function. It wouldn't be the right way for us to go. But this bit in the middle is a completely new area, and we're just starting to have conversations with a couple of companies that have been through the process to see how it all goes. There's no time to talk about the virtual liver or a nice thing in the New England Journal of Medicine very recently about using modelling to determine increased risk of short-term and long-term failure in knee replacements and the uses that might be put to. But just to conclude, that we, and I think in the future, because of the difficulty of coming up with anything about innovation, I think thinking about additional benefits is far more helpful than thinking about newness. And I'm sure Lionel will talk much more about this, but about patients and technology users having very high expectations about what those benefits might be, and that there probably is a value in modelling, which I didn't have time to talk to you about. But the earlier, I think we can all conclude, the earlier we try to bring benefits to patients, the more we will need further evidence to be generated. And that's very much what we've been finding just from our early experience of doing this from NICE. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Sorry to hurry up, but we do have to finish on time.
Of course.
I'm not surprised you didn't get the answers from Ian Kennedy. I've known him for 25 years. The only questions he ever answers are those he himself has put. We've got time. Just one question for Mirella. Yeah.
Back up the front.
A quick question. NHS evidence obviously holds a wealth of information, but it's restricted to NHS personnel. What can be done to make that widely available?
I think it would be quite expensive. One of the things that we did was to take the entire electronic journal library, which is bought by the Department of Health for the NHS, and NICE took on the management of that a couple of years ago, and I guess that's probably the core of NHS evidence. There's an awful lot more in there now in terms of colleges and other bodies' sort of guidelines and so on, and standards. But I think it would be really quite expensive to do it because it's just journal subscriptions, but it's a jolly big one. That's the problem. It sure is taxpayers' money, yeah.
Okay, right. Thank you very much indeed.